The past has a way of clinging to certain places, like an unseen thread weaving through time, binding the living to the dead. Some say it's the weight of forgotten tragedies, others believe it's the restless spirits of those who met their end too soon, their stories left unfinished. The air feels different in these places, heavier, colder, as though every breath draws you deeper into a world that doesn't want you to leave. Shadows seem to move when you're not looking, and a fleeting whisper can chill you to your core. But for those who dare to wander, the allure of uncovering what lies beyond the veil of the ordinary is too powerful to resist. Among the curious seekers is Sophie, a skeptic with a fascination for the untold. She's heard the stories, of course, tales of mournful apparitions and echoes of cries long silenced. But they're just that, stories. And yet something compels her to tread paths that others avoid, to peer into windows darkened by time, and to listen for sounds no one else can hear. Sophie isn't the kind of person to let her imagination run wild. If anything, she prides herself on her ability to distinguish fact from fiction, reality from myth. So when Sophie finds herself alone, separated from a group she had thought was firmly rooted in the mundane, the air around her shifts. Her skepticism starts to waver with each fleeting glimpse of movement in the periphery, every whisper that doesn't belong to the living. It isn't just the stories that unsettle her now, it's the feeling that the stories might be watching her, circling her, waiting for her to become part of them. The rational voice in Sophie's head insists that everything has an explanation. But the truth she's about to uncover doesn't care about rationality, because sometimes the things we tell ourselves are just stories turn out to be far more real than we ever imagined. And once the line between the past and the present begins to blur, stepping back across it may no longer be an option. Nestled in the heart of Quebec, Old Montreal is a district with a history as rich as it is eerie. Its cobblestone streets, gaslit alleys, and centuries-old buildings make it a magnet for tourists and for spirits of the past. Among its many attractions, the infamous Ghost Walk is renowned for leading visitors through chilling tales of tragedy, revenge, and the supernatural. What most don't realize is that the most horrifying story isn't one told by the guides. It's one that unfolds for those unfortunate enough to stumble upon the dark truth lurking in the shadows. Sophie Delacroix was a history major on her first visit to Old Montreal. Eager to immerse herself in its vibrant culture, she signed up for the Ghost Walk. Guided by a charismatic storyteller named Elaine, the group meandered through dimly lit streets, stopping at landmarks like the Bon Secours Market and the Notre Dame Basilica. Each stop was accompanied by a tale of sorrowful spirits or vengeful phantoms. Sophie was skeptical but intrigued, jotting down notes for her travel blog. As the night wore on, the group reached the Chateau Ramezay, a museum with a dark reputation. Elaine described how, in the 18th century, a servant girl named Eloise had been falsely accused of poisoning her mistress. Hanged in the courtyard, Eloise was said to haunt the museum, her sobs echoing through the night. Sophie, captivated by the tale, lingered as the group moved on. Alone in the courtyard, Sophie noticed a faint whisper carried by the wind. It wasn't Alain's voice, nor the murmur of distant tourists. It was soft, like a plea. "Help me," it seemed to say. Her pulse quickened, but she dismissed it as her imagination. When she turned to rejoin the group, they were gone. She rushed to retrace her steps, but the labyrinthine streets seemed different, more sinister. The gas lamps flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced like figures from another world. Sophie called out, her voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. Suddenly, she heard footsteps, heavy and deliberate. A figure emerged from the fog, a woman in 18th century attire. Her pale face was streaked with tears, and her eyes bore a sorrowful intensity. "You stayed?" the woman whispered, her voice trembling. "You must listen." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run but found herself rooted to the spot. The woman reached out, her icy hand brushing Sophie's arm. In a flash, Sophie was no longer in the courtyard. She stood in a dimly lit room, the air thick with the stench of decay. Before her was a young woman, Eloise, kneeling before a stern magistrate. The scene played out like a ghostly reenactment, but Sophie felt the fear as if it were her own. "I swear, I did nothing wrong," Eloise cried, her voice cracking. The magistrate remained unmoved, sentencing her to death. Sophie screamed, the room dissolving around her. When she came to, she was back in the courtyard, alone. Shaken, Sophie resumed her search for the group. The street seemed darker now, the shadows deeper. She passed a window and caught her reflection, or so she thought. The face staring back wasn't hers, it was Eloise's. Startled, she stumbled backward, colliding with a cold stone wall. A man's laughter echoed, sinister and mocking. "Enjoying the tour?" A voice sneered. Sophie spun around to see a figure cloaked in black, his face obscured by the hood. "You've seen too much," he hissed. Before she could respond, the figure vanished, leaving behind a metallic smell like blood. Desperate, Sophie found herself at Place Cartier, where the tour had begun. She hoped to find Elaine or any sign of the group. Instead, the square was deserted, save for a single lantern flickering on a bench. Beneath it lay an old book, its leather cover cracked with age. Curious, Sophie opened it to find pages filled with accounts of paranormal activity in Old Montreal. One entry stood out: the vanishing tourist. The story described how, every few decades, a visitor would be lured away from the ghost walk and never seen again. Witnesses claimed to hear their cries echoing through the streets, but no one could find them. Sophie's blood ran cold. She slammed the book shut, realizing her name was written at the bottom of the page before she had even opened it. Sophie's phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Elaine. "Where did you go?" "Meet us at the old port." Relieved, she hurried toward the port, the cobblestones slick with an unnatural dampness. As she approached the waterfront, the air grew colder and a thick fog rolled in. She saw the group ahead, but something was off. Their movements were jerky, almost puppet-like. "Elaine," Sophie called, but the figures didn't respond. When she drew closer, she realized they weren't human. Their hollow eyes and frozen expressions sent a jolt of terror through her. Elaine turned, his mouth moving, but no sound came out. Instead, a deafening scream erupted from the fog, shattering the scene. Sophie turned to run, but found herself at the edge of the water. The surface was unnaturally still, reflecting not her own image but that of Eloise. The reflection reached out, pulling Sophie into the icy depths. As she sank, she heard the whispers again, "Help me." When Sophie awoke, she was back in her hotel room. The morning sun streamed through the window, and the sounds of the city filled the air. She chalked it up to a vivid nightmare until she checked her phone. Her photos from the tour were gone, replaced by blurry images of faces she didn't recognize. Determined to uncover the truth, Sophie returned to the Chateau Rémusé the following evening. The museum staff claimed they hadn't hosted a ghost walk in years. Confused, she searched online for Elaine and the company that organized the tour. They didn't exist. As Sophie delved deeper, she uncovered stories of others who had experienced similar events. Each account ended with the same chilling detail. The victims vanished without a trace within weeks of their experience. Fear gripped her as she realized her time was running out. Over the next few days, Sophie was plagued by visions of Eloise and the cloaked figure. The whispers followed her everywhere, growing louder and more insistent. Desperate, she sought help from a local medium who warned her that she was marked by a curse. The only way to break it was to free Eloise's spirit by uncovering the truth behind her death. Sophie returned to Old Montreal one last time, retracing her steps and piecing together the fragments of Eloise's story. In the end, she uncovered evidence that the magistrate had been bribed to convict Eloise, covering up a nobleman's crime. Sophie published the story, hoping it would bring peace to the restless spirit. But peace never came. Days later, Sophie disappeared. Her belongings were found in her hotel room, but there was no sign of her. Locals claim her cries can still be heard echoing through the streets on foggy nights, warning others to stay away from Old Montreal's ghost walk. As Sophie's story reminds us, some places hold memories too powerful to fade, their echoes lingering long after the events that birthed them. Whether it's the restless spirits tied to unfinished stories or the energy of emotions that refuse to let go, the unknown waits for those curious or bold enough to seek it out. The line between what is real and what is imagined is thinner than we'd like to believe. And once you step into the shadows, you may find yourself forever changed. Do you dare explore more tales like this? The stories we share are just the beginning of the mysteries that lurk in the unseen corners of our world. If you're intrigued by the unknown and fascinated by the haunting whispers of the past, there's so much more to uncover. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another chilling tale. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. We'd love to hear your take on Sophie's journey into the unknown.